In this segment, we'll be looking at the Vietnam War as the United States government's anti-communist strategy of containment in Asia continued. The Vietnam War lasted essentially from 1954 until 1973. This was America's attempt to contain communism in Southeast Asia. Again, the policy of containment is to prevent the spread of communism. The United States feared the domino theory. That is, if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would fall. And with Vietnam being on the edge of China, this was a very real threat to America. When we take a look at the presidents who presided over the Vietnam War, we need to include President Eisenhower. His role was primarily to assist the French and send some military advisors. John F. Kennedy kicked it up a notch as he increased the advisors and sent in a few troops to begin battles. But Lyndon Johnson is associated with escalation. He's going to send as many troops as necessary. After all, he's not going to allow the United States to lose its first war. When things go bad, President Richard Nixon is going to proclaim peace with honor, that we need to return the battle to the people of Vietnam and get the Americans out. As we analyze the early involvement of the United States in Vietnam, Vietnam had been part of what we call French Indochina. That is to say, it was a French colony at the conclusion of World War I. After World War II, the United States encouraged France to give this up, but they said no, it was far too valuable. The Communist Party that was led by Ho Chi Minh, this guy right here, rose to power. It was a true communist party, and they were wildly popular, had many followers. He was very deadly, though, in the art of guerrilla warfare and terrorism that was directed against his French oppressors. As the French fell back, they asked the United States for help. Naturally, because we knew Ho Chi Minh was a communist, we agreed to assist them. By 1954, the United States was financing approximately 75% of their efforts against Ho Chi Minh. But again, this is all financial up until this point. But in 1954, at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the French failed miserably. They were forced to flee the nation, and the United States was left there to negotiate a peace. Since it worked out so well in Korea and Germany, note the sarcasm, we decided we'll go ahead and divide Vietnam. In a similar fashion to Korea, though this time along the 17th parallel. North Vietnam was going to remain communist. Notice that its northern neighbor is China. South Vietnam is going to be a pro-Western, supposed to be a democracy, but it didn't work out so well. Ho Chi Minh was a true communist, and he made very popular changes in the north, while South Vietnam ended up being run by a very corrupt dictator who was backed by the United States simply because he opposed communism. The Northern Communist Army, and there were also what they called communist guerrilla fighters, were the Viet Cong, those communist guerrillas. They began to attack villages and areas in South Vietnam, trying to unify the nation under communism. The South Vietnamese government resisted. They tried to fight back. The United States began sending military advisors under John F. Kennedy. This role was later expanded by Lyndon Johnson, and then in 1963 included larger and larger numbers of troops. American containment in Vietnam now, like Korea, included live battle. It was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which was passed by Congress in 1964, gave Lyndon Johnson the right to expand the war effort. As much as he deemed necessary, he could escalate our involvement. And so Lyndon Johnson is associated with the escalation of the war throughout the 1960s. At the time, most Americans, a strong majority of Americans, supported the war in Vietnam in the 1960s. Even though Lyndon Johnson himself would have preferred to spend the money from the Vietnam War on building a great society, which is what he advocated, he was not about to allow the United States to lose its first ever war. But reports came back. We seem to be winning. We seem to be winning. We seem to be winning. Bombs were being dropped. Soldiers were making kills. It looked like the North Vietnamese army and the communist guerrillas had to be close to surrender. Victory was almost ours, or not. In 1968, the communist guerrillas in South Vietnam and the North Vietnamese army led a coordinated attack all across Vietnam at every major stronghold of the United States. And this was a simultaneous attack that occurred on the Tet holiday, catching Americans completely by surprise. Even though the United States held its own, even though we did not lose a single one of these Tet battles, it did prove to America that the war was not almost over. In spite of what we had seen on television, in spite of what we had heard from our government, it did not seem to be close to being over, because if they could amass a counterattack like this, they have a lot more power than we thought they did. And this is the moment when public opinion begins to shift. In 1968, after the Tet Offensive, this is when we begin to second guess our ideas. And this moment is going to turn many Americans against our war efforts in Vietnam. We had many problems as we attempted to fight this war. For one, we were forced to fight what's called a limited war. That is to say, we were not allowed to engage civilians, which on the surface you think that's absolutely right and proper. However, many of these civilians were actually communist guerrillas who would just as soon kill off the Americans as well. And so we were forced to stay in limited areas. We were not allowed to chase after certain groups of people and cross certain lines that were deemed neutral or demilitarized. It was also very difficult because Ho Chi Minh was a very popular communist man, and he was making very popular reforms in North Vietnam, and many people wanted and supported his ideas. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, which supplied the South Vietnamese communists with weapons, ran through neutral countries of Laos and Cambodia, the same countries where we were not allowed to attack. And while we knew where the weapons were coming in, we were not allowed to go out and get them. And this sapped American morale. Also, it was very difficult to tell exactly who the enemy was. They didn't all wear uniforms. Many of them were civilians living in South Vietnam who were part of the Viet Cong, our enemies. And it was difficult to identify who the enemy was. They could be old, they could be young. Men, women, even children proved to be American enemies. When Nixon was elected president in 1968, after all, Lyndon Johnson refused to run again. He was done with being president during the Vietnam War. Bobby Kennedy, who was the next in line, the next most popular Democratic candidate, was assassinated in June of 1968. And Richard Nixon then comes into office. A relatively close election, but he won fair and square, according to Nixon and his followers. Nixon came in with a plan that he called Vietnamization. Remember, he wanted peace with honor in Vietnam. After he was elected president, and he talked about peace with honor, and he talked about pulling things out and returning the fight to the Vietnamese people, that is to say, Vietnamization, having them take over the war effort, he increased his bombing and even included bombing areas of Cambodia and even Laos, which were technically neutral countries. He looked like he was an insane, mad bomber. As he increased his bombing raids on North Vietnam and into these other presumed neutral countries, a lot of Americans looked at him and thought, something is a little bit wrong here. However, his bombing campaign and his aggressive foreign policy forced the North Vietnamese to actually come to the table, and Nixon was able to negotiate what he called peace with honor. That is to say, Americans are going to withdraw from Vietnam. And Vietnamization, that is returning the fight of the Vietnam War to the Vietnamese people, was coming true. America was on its way out. There was also a bitter division that was going on at home. The popular saying was a veteran from Vietnam left a war there to find a war right here at home. That war was happening between the Hawks and the Doves. The Hawks were pro-war. They supported the ideas of containment of communism. They feared the domino theory. If one nation fell to communism, its neighbors would fall. And after all, this is a must-win. We have spent too much, we're too far in it. We are committed to winning this war in Vietnam, that we will stand up to the communists wherever they threaten liberties. The Doves were the anti-war movement. This happened mostly on college campuses around the United States. The Doves felt that this war was really none of our business, that we were destroying the people of Vietnam, we were destroying their society, and it was costing too much money, and 54,000 American men had lost their lives. This was too much of a cost for any war, said the Doves, and they wanted to pull out. This bitter division at home, as public opinion turned, forced people like Richard Nixon to change strategies and find a way to exit Vietnam. Many legacies are left over from the Vietnam War. After all, as I mentioned, the United States pulled out of Vietnam in 1973. We agreed to assist the South Vietnam government with money and with weapons, just not American lives. But by 1975, Vietnam had fallen to communist rule. In the following years, Cambodia and Laos also fell to communism. It seemed that the domino theory was coming true. In 1974, Richard Nixon was forced to resign from office as a result of the famed Watergate scandal. While he was not kicked out of office, he was not even impeached for this, he became the first and only president to date to resign from office. American faith in the government diminished a great deal. We felt that we had been lied to in Vietnam. We found out that Richard Nixon had lied to us when it came to the government. And we also learned that opposition to the war was reflected onto the treatment of the veterans who returned home. We did not separate the idea of the soldier versus the war, that the soldier was doing his duty. We lumped them all together one and the same, and many Americans regrettably blamed the soldiers themselves for the problems that were going on in Vietnam, and blamed the soldiers themselves for the position that America was in. The United States anti-communist strategy of containment in Asia led us to involvement, not just in Korea, but also in Vietnam. This war is going to demonstrate the power of public opinion in reversing foreign policy. When Americans turned against the war in Vietnam, the government followed our opinions and eventually pulled out. This war tested the democratic system to its very limits. It left scars on American society that have not yet been erased. Think about how many times we refer to the Vietnam War. This made many Americans very skeptical of the future of the military, the future of the government, and even the future of American peacekeeping interventions in the world. And these skepticisms exist today. So the legacies of Vietnam are still with us, even now.